Hello everybody, this is Train King James here, as we are going through the Season 17 tier list. We are officially out of the Nitrogen era, we have moved on to the Brenner era, and I am excitedly going through these episodes, and I think there's going to be a massive change in terms of where this season ranks compared to the previous few, and I think many of you expect the same. But anyway, let's not waste too much time. Let's get into the episodes. So our first episode of the season is Kevin's Cranky Friend, and I have put this episode in the A tier. I think it's a really solid season starter. I like the idea of pairing Cranky and Kevin together. It's two Crane characters that haven't really ever met before, and I think they work off each other really nicely. One thing I like about Season 17, they really diversified the character pairings this season. It's not just Thomas and some other character. Like, Thomas is in this episode, but it's not really about him at all. It's nice to see other characters on Sodor and what they get up to on a day-to-day basis, and I think this is just a fun way to start off a fairly fun season. And then we move on to Scruff's Makeover. A solid episode, so it goes in the B tier. We get an episode all about Scruff, really for the first time since Season 14. And I like this episode because it's Scruff basically going through an identity crisis when he's cleaned up and he realizes maybe he doesn't like being dirty anymore or working outside of the garbage dump. I like that we get a brief moment where the three big engines interact off each other, which is something that doesn't happen all that often. And it's not just like they're at the sheds with the other engines, it's literally the three of them heckling an engine. Like, we haven't seen that really since the classic series, and I really like that. But other than that, there's not a ton that happens. It's mostly just Scruff meandering across the island. So it's not like the greatest episode this season, but definitely a strong one, so I put it in the B tier. Ladies and gentlemen, I do declare, for the first time in several seasons, we finally have an S tier episode. It has been so long, but Wayward Winston brought us back. I love this episode. I love it for so many different reasons. Just off the vibes alone, this episode kind of reminds me of a Season 5 episode. The idea of this chase of a character going around the island, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Busy Going Back, especially with, a character being chased down by another character. I just like the hijinks that Winston gets up to. I like this episode because we really get to learn the Fat Controller's relationship, something we really didn't get to see beforehand. I like the fact that the Fat Controller for once is partially responsible for things that happen, and both him and Winston get to learn a lesson. But ultimately, this was just a fun episode, a lot of nice funny moments, a lot of great bits. I love the situation at the crossing where Birdie's trying to get across and then Winston shoots through and then Thomas and the Fat Controller go past and the Fat Controller tells Birdie to not to move, so Birdie's like, alright, I won't move, and he just sits there. I don't know, I like that kind of stuff. Good humor. And then we move on to Gordon Runs Dry. Now, when Season 17 first came out, this was the first episode I saw of this era. And I didn't know Season 17 was coming out when it did. It just kind of was on YouTube one day, and I just saw, oh, Gordon Runs Dry. And I ended up, I clicked on it, watched it. I was a little confused because it said, US dub, but I can hear, a British guy talking. And that's when I learned about all the changes they had made. And it's a really solid episode, and I put it in A tier. I like a lot of subtle things that Season 17 does. I like the idea that, now, when Thomas is on the main line, he's not doing it because they don't have a good reason. Now it's he's pulling the local. I like that they kind of subtly have given Thomas that job. Yeah, maybe over the years he grows a little tired of his branch line, so maybe the Fat Controller sometimes uses him on mainline duties for, a day or two. On the local or something. I can see that happening. I like getting to see more of Paxton here, and him and Gordon interact. I like Gordon in this episode in general. I like the ending when all the characters make fun of him. It has that very classic series feeling ending, where all the main characters are together, kind of riffing on someone. There's a lot of good funny moments as well. I like Gordon kind of listing off the stations, and then he notices the lake. This episode kind of has that same energy of when you have to pee, but then you try not to think of anything like water or anything liquidy so it doesn't make you pee and whatnot. It's that moment's very relatable. And Gordon sees the lake and he kind of panics. Um, but yeah, really strong episode. And then we get Calm Down Caitlin, which I think is a pretty solid episode. It's a little repetitive, but it's not bad. We get introduced to Caitlin more properly here. So in King of the Railway, we don't get to meet much of Connor and Caitlin. They're kind of introduced in like the last third of the movie. But here we get to see Caitlin. She's more excitable and, bouncy. And we get to see her do a lot of the night jobs. And we get to see the Flying Kipper, something we didn't really see a ton of in the Nitrogen era. I think we only saw it once very briefly. We get to see her take the mail train. It's nice to see it acknowledged really again in an episode. Like we see characters, we see Percy pull it, but we don't really see it like as a night job as much anymore. But yeah, fun episode. Nice to introduce her. I like how slowly more and more of the characters become annoyed with Caitlin keeping them up at night. But yeah, pretty solid episode nonetheless. And then we get the weakest episode, in my opinion, of the season. And it's Steamy Stafford. This episode kind of feels like a holdover from, last season. And the reason why this season it's in the D tier, whereas last season it may have been like a C tier episode, is the standards are higher now. The writers here have shown they can write better quality, so to see them kind of slip back into this old habit and this kind of a boring 3 strikes kind of bland episode, it's a little disheartening. The problem with Stafford's not a very exciting character to begin with, and this is not a very exciting episode. I do like that they do highlight like some of the uses of Stafford, like he's a quieter engine, but other than that, it's not really it's not an interesting episode. It's kind of dumb just with Stafford making all the weird sounds and all that. Again, it's the weakest episode of season 17. Like, this would probably be like an average season 16 episode. So, in that case, it shows you why it's graded so harshly. But the fact that this is the worst that this season has to put out, that's a good thing. Then we get Henry's Hero, and we immediately bounce back with another strong episode. I really enjoyed this one. Henry's Hero, Unlucky Tug has talked about this several times, about how it kind of has, both the main characters, Henry and Hero, aren't exactly wrong. I'm not a huge fan of when Henry's very, like a hypochondriac, where he's very worried about something, but here it makes sense, because Henry has had, issues with coal, and has had issues in the past, and he would be more sensitive to it than Hero most likely is. I'm not saying Hero's also wrong, because he has a job to get done. They kind of have to push through. I really like what the season does with Hero, pairing him up with a couple of different characters. Here we get to see him with Henry, and I really think that they have a nice connection. I love that Henry kind of gets a little bit of a super rescue moment, where he gets to push Hero in his heavy train all the way to the docks. I love that kind of a moment. But yeah, really, overall, good episode. No real complaints here, so that's why it goes in the S tier. Then we have Luke's New Friend. A sweet, quieter episode. I put it in the B tier. Not a ton happens, because I do feel like this episode could have been a touch shorter, but I do think it's very sweet. Nothing really wrong with it, just a little slow, a little drawn out. Like, I feel like this would be a much snappier, like, 5-minute episode, because once the deer is with Luke at Blue Mountain Quarry, we all know where the story's going. We know that he's going to have to return it. It's that kind of, like, typical story. It's just a shame that, you have to fill out the time constraints, so I understand, but it's a little longer than I think it needed to be. But The Switch is a much stronger episode, which belongs in the A tier. I enjoyed this episode quite a bit. I like that we get to pair up the 2 newest Narragated engines together, and they have a kind of friendship, sort of romantic dynamic. I like the idea of this, swapping jobs for a day type thing. I don't believe Thomas has done that before, where a character just straight up switches to see whose life is better. So I like that. I like that it's 2 characters in 2 new environments that we're still getting used to, the castle and Blue Mountain Quarry. So yeah, it's a good episode for that. And that's why it is in the A tier. Then we have Not Now, Charlie, which I believe is Charlie's final episode as a main character in the show. Season 17 gave a lot of the nitrogen characters a second chance to kind of be a main character, and then after the season, a lot of them don't. And, you know, this episode's pretty good. I put it in the B tier. It's the classic boy who cried wolf story. You know, for Charlie, he tells too many jokes, and when he has to tell engines there's something serious, none of them believe him. It's pretty simple, but I do kind of like this episode. I like that when it's time to be serious, Charlie actually can be serious. It's just a shame that, like, Charlie does become a little more flanderized and just becomes, like, a joke-telling character. I like when we do get more layers to him, but it's a pretty simple story, so I think it goes in B tier. Anyway, so now we have probably my second least favorite episode of this season is The Lost Puff. It's a weaker story, I think. I really like Paxton. He's one of my favorite CGI characters. I think this is just a weaker story for him. It's a little dumb, but there are some funny moments, but I thought it kind of belonged in C tier. I think if different characters were involved, I'd be a little more, you know, harsher on it, but I kind of can understand Paxton's, you know, attitude in this episode. I do like him and Thomas kind of joking around together. I like Steven's face when Paxton mistakes Puff for a cloud. I like Toby laughing at the Steamworks at Paxton when he hears how ridiculous, like, this quest of Paxton is. But it's sweet and earnest. It's just a little dumb, in my opinion. And then we get The Thomas Way, the episode that so many people in the fandom were excited to see. I didn't mention it in Henry's Hero because, you know, it's a minor part of the episode, but we got Duck back in that episode, and we get Duck featured alongside Thomas. And there's a lot of theories about Thomas and Duck not necessarily being the best of friends, and this episode's a good support for that, but I really enjoy it. I have it in A tier. I think they work off of each other really nicely. I kind of like Harold as a middleman. I love all the near accidents they get into with Harold. I like the moment where they go into the tunnel and Harold starts scraping with his propellers. Just a lot of good scenes in this episode, and I think Thomas and Duck do work off each other pretty nicely, and it was a really smart first pairing. Then we have The Phantom Express, which I think is, again, another solid episode this season. The Phantom Express, I'm going to put in B tier. It's a classic James trying to scare Percy episode, a little preview for what's to come down the line in terms of specials. I do like Stephen as the middleman here. We get to see more of him working off of some other characters. I like the spooky aesthetic of Allstead at night with the fog. I like Stephen's kind of dry wit and humor in this episode, but overall, pretty solid episode, so nothing amazing about it, but it goes in B tier. I think it's a fair episode. Then we get Percy's Lucky Day, the return of Bill and Ben to the series. And I actually really enjoy this episode. It's really sweet. I like that we learn very quickly Percy doesn't have the lucky charm, and that he doesn't have the lucky horseshoe, and he loses that, but he still has a pretty good day. And I like it. It kind of becomes a placebo effect for Percy. I like seeing Stephen work off of Percy. I think that's a good dynamic. Bill and Ben in this episode are great. I remember when this episode first came out, I knew Bill and Ben were coming back. I didn't know this was the episode when they came back, because I knew the next one was the one they were featured. And when Bill and Ben showed up, I was shocked and I was so hyped. And it's just, like, Bill and Ben are some of my favorite characters, and I love their dynamic. I love how they work off of each other in this series. I love how they work off of other characters, and we'll talk about that more in the next episode. But yeah, Percy's Lucky Day, luckily, gets an A. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. Speaking of Bill and Ben, we gotta talk about Bill or Ben, because that's our next episode, and this episode is another S tier episode. I love it. It definitely kind of reminds you a little bit of the Diesel with the way Bill and Ben play their tricks on Connor, but I just love how this entire episode, from start to literally the end, is Bill and Ben gaslighting everyone and just tricking people, and how they just have like a silver tongue, and how they always seem to get their way no matter what happens or what goes wrong. Like, even they try switching their paintwork and it doesn't work, and I love how kind of cocky Connor is, and it's like, yeah, I can beat you two pretty easily. And, you know, obviously Bill and Ben just trick him, and it's just an entire back and forth of just completely fooling Connor. I really enjoy this episode, and I think it's well written. Then we get Too Many Fire Engines. I like this episode. I think Flynn is a very interesting character. His first few iterations in the show weren't well written. Here, I think he is written well. I think he's a much better character here. I like how they kind of are presented with this dynamic at first of like, maybe there is too many fire engines, but then you realize no, there isn't, and it's a very simple story. I love that moment when Butch kind of has to give Flynn a motivational speech. It's a great character moment for Butch. It's nice to see Flynn competent in a rescue again for like the first time since Day of the Diesels. But yeah, overall, good episode, B tier. I think that's where it belongs. So now we're getting into the Christmas episodes, and we start off with No Snow for Thomas, which I put in the C tier. And here's why I put it in C tier. It's a solid overall episode. In and of itself, I would probably just consider it a B tier, but the reason why I dragged it down to C tier is the show has already more or less done this story, and it did it much better. I mean, this is essentially Thomas, Emily, and the Snowplow without all of the emotion and feeling in that episode. In that episode, I believe I put an S tier when I did Season 8, whereas this episode I only put C tier because it just feels like a watered-down version of that episode. I mean, Emily is working off of Thomas, but, like, not really. It's not like either character goes through, like, much change or anything. It's basically the same exact story. There's some nice moments, but that's the only reason why I put it in C tier. It's just a repetitive story. But we do get better Christmas episodes coming up as we start with Santa's Little Engine, which I put in the B tier. I like this episode. It's got a very simple feel. We get to see more of the Fat Controller and the Earl interacting off of each other. It kind of has a little bit of a Season 1 feel just because of how small the cast is. I love Winston's embarrassment at being dressed up as a sleigh. We get to see more of him. It's just a really good episode overall. Not a lot to say about this one. But I think the best episode of the best Christmas episode of Season 17, of course, is the missing Christmas decorations. We get the first TV series appearance of Diesel 10 in an episode. All of his prior appearances and technically appearances since, because we haven't seen him since, have all been in specials. Now we get him in an episode, and it's kind of Grinch Who Stole Christmas a little bit, but not really. I kind of like that Percy has a little bit of a Cindy Lou Who moment when he sees Diesel 10 stealing the decorations. I just love the chase. It just gives me O.J. Simpson and the White Bronco vibes. But, yeah, it's a funny episode. I love Paxton in this episode. I love that... I mean, how many characters have we ever seen stand up to Diesel 10? Like, he directly tells Diesel 10 no. Like, I guess Splatter and Dodge do it, like, randomly at the end of Magic Railroad. But, like, Paxton tells Diesel 10 no. And leaves. And lives. And, like, that's so cool. It's a great moment for him. I love after all the decorations are, like, messed up by the Diesels, and then Paxton shows up and says, hey, I just picked up this car at the yard. The Fat Controller's giving us decorations. Oh, hello, everyone. And it's like Diesel 10, all he had to do was just let Paxton get the stupid decorations, and he would have been fine. But I like it. It's a little simplistic for Diesel 10. It's very much cartoony villain, but he kind of is a cartoon villain. Then we get the Frozen Turntable, which I think is another solid episode of the season. It's a good Gordon story. Like that we actually get to hear Norman talk. I believe, well, technically the Missing Christmas decorations was the first episode where Norman talked, and we also get to hear more of him here. Really solid episode, good Gordon story. Not really a ton to say, so like I said, I put it in B tier. A lot of Season 17 episodes are fairly simple, and the simple ones pretty much just ended up in B tier. And then we go to S tier with Away from the Sea. We get a salty episode, and it's nice. We don't get a ton of Random Docs episodes in the previous few years, and a lot of them, weirdly enough, don't revolve around Salty for some reason. I don't know why. Nitrogen just didn't use him all that often. He would appear every now and then, but it was usually like in the beginning of an episode. I'd be surprised. But this is a great episode. We get to see his vulnerable side again. You know, we get the callback to Salty's secret. You know, we haven't seen Salty's side since Season 7. So it's nice to see that part. I love the jump scare crash where he runs into the oil barrels at the Diesel Works mid-song. You know, Porter's there but that's fine. He doesn't really have much impact on this episode, or any episode for that matter. But this is a really, really good story, and I kind of like the idea of Salty being a little nervous about potentially being replaced. Then we go to Gone Fishing, which is Harvey's reappearance in the show. He is back. Have not seen him since season 12. And it's a very slow, calm, quiet episode. Very season 1-like. But, again, solid episode. I like Harvey's interaction with Bill and Ben. I like seeing a little bit more of Porter. Seeing, like, hey, he's got a little bit of wisdom to him. You know, there's something there. I just wish they did more with Porter, but, you know, can't get everything. But Harvey is a pretty chill character, and for that reason, I'm going to give it this episode a B. Really solid episode. Just, I like the moment where Harvey has the accident, and he's, like, upset, and he's like, oh, wait, I can just clean this up myself. And it's like, I kind of like that. I don't know why. It's something that, like, most other characters can't do. And it's like, oh, yeah, Harvey could just clean up after himself. Like, that's nice. Then we get the Afternoon Tea Express, which I think is a solid Steven outing. I really enjoyed this episode. I put it in the B tier. We get to see Steven and Spencer. You have the rocket, and get versus probably the fastest steam engine in the world, technically. But yeah, you know, I like their dynamic. It's nice to see Spencer again. Not a ton really to say about this episode. Just a nice, enjoyable episode overall. And then we get the Smelly Kipper, which is another S-tier episode. I really enjoy this one. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Sliding Scales out of the Railway series. I think a lot of fans have said that. I like James completely just gaslighting Henry into thinking he dreamt that he would take the Kipper, and then he just makes Henry late. I like the Troublesome Trucks, because, you know, we just haven't really seen much of the Troublesome Trucks until really this season. It kind of started a little bit in season 16, but they didn't really say much. It really is like King of the Railway in this season where we really get the trucks back. So it's nice to see them kind of intimidate an engine again. The crash is fun. I like all the fish jokes. So yeah, just an overall really good episode. Then we have No More Mr. Nice Engine. What's it like when a really nice character gets pushed to his limit? I like this. I love this story a lot, honestly. And it's nice to see Hero, one of the most patient, calm characters of the entire show, paired up with Diesel. And I think they work really well off each other. We get a little bit of Edward here, too. It's the closest we get to an Edward episode this season. But really, really good episode overall. I put it in the S tier, and it's our final S tier episode of the season. I like the crash towards the end with the spilled milk. The Fat Controller and Hero getting covered in milk and all that. I think that's a fun moment. I like Diesel getting caught by Thomas. I like that this episode, like, Hero, he does really try to be nice and kind, and Diesel pushes him to his limit, and then he finally snaps. It's like, alright, no more Mr. Nice Engine. And then he just kind of... And it's not even on Diesel, it's on the truck. I love that about Hero. We get to see another side to him. Like, as patient and kind as Hero is, he has his own limits. And I think that makes it a really strong. And last but not least, we get Thomas's shortcut, which, in my opinion, really reminds me of Season 1. It has been since probably Season 3 that we've just had a basic, calm Thomas's branch line story, where the story is pretty much self-contained on his branch line. It's those characters interacting off of each other, Thomas and Bertie, and it just feels right. You know, I think the idea of looking for a shortcut is a little kind of dumb, but it's not the worst idea. Like, it's not terrible. It's like, 'cause railways typically wouldn't have shortcuts. But I like the fact that Thomas just winds up on old tracks and whatnot. I think that's a little believable. The accident is nice as well. But it just has that you know, Season 1 type feel. We see Bertie and Thomas race again. Just a nice, simple way to end off this season. And that, my friends, is Season 17. Here is the tier list itself and how I rank the episodes. Much more positive season than we've had in recent times. And I am so glad we are back. I was just so tired of watching so many bad episodes. But now we get back to basics. and I really enjoyed this season. Yeah, again, a lot of the season I would describe as very solid. These plots are simple, but they're really nice episodes. A lot of great character pairings. Surprisingly, not a ton of Thomas. Like, he appears in every episode, or a whole lot of episodes, I should say. But he isn't necessarily the main character. He'll just show up, like, briefly for a scene or two. And I just wish that it kind of stayed that way throughout the show. Like, Thomas is a good main character, but you don't need him in every single scene, every single episode. It just feels a little much. You know, if you want people to fall in love with all of your characters, even the smaller ones, you gotta, expand the cast a little bit. So, with that, we end the Season 17 tier list. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. This is Train King James, signing off. Have a nice day, everyone.